So we're talking to Melissa Gould. Hi, Melissa.
Hi.
So good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Before we do, though, you recently took a vacation. I saw it on your Instagram. And I want to know this because I'm about to start traveling a lot. What are the 3 items you have to have in your carry-on?
Wow, you're throwing me with this. The 3 items. Well, believe it or not, I still like to have a mask with me.
Yes.
Especially for plane travel.
Sure.
Me too.
Yeah, or just anything where you're like with a massive group of people.
Do your ears get sore, though, if you wear the mask for a long time?
They don't.
They don't? Mine do. The backs of my ears get really sore.
No, I didn't notice that.
Okay, fine.
Now you're blaming Laura. You're like, God, my ears are killing me.
Yeah, you're
Laura
going to be like
Cathcart's
the next day. Okay, so a mask.
A mask. I have to have lip balm
Yes,
with me at all
yes.
times. Which is funny because that is almost counterintuitive to the mask
Right.
wearing,
But it's still like,
because my lips get dry.
yeah.
And then I also like to have a breath mint.
Do you like Altoids or do you like
I
other
do.
ones? You
I like
okay.
Altoids, yes,
Okay.
but like the big,
the big ones.
and I think it's the blue tin, not the red one.
Okay.
So I think it's
the
like
blue tin's my favorite.
winter mint or something
Yeah.
like that.
You
Winter
don't
green.
see as much
Spearmint.
of the blue ones,
I
though.
think
You
it's
see
winter
more of the
green.
red.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's okay. I like that. Those are 3.
That's
So we
solid.
know that if you're getting on a plane, we're going to be able to dig in your bag and find a mask and lip balm
Yes.
and winter green Altoid breath mints in the blue tin.
And you'd probably find it in my purse that I'm carrying today
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
So you could fly.
Always with you.
She could
Yeah.
fly at any point. So you
Any
could
That's right.
jump on a
moment
plane.
She's
notice.
ready to go.
I'm ready.
All right. Thank you for that. I am Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, Hun. So we are talking to screenwriter, speaker, essayist, and neighbor, Melissa Gould. She is the author of the best-selling memoir, Widowish, which is such a great title.
Right?
Thank you.
Yeah, and like Scott said at the top, thank you so much for coming to talk about this. And I'm just going to read something you wrote to start us off. Is that okay?
Sure.
So you wrote to us, when my husband died unexpectedly of West Nile Virus, I was left to raise our only daughter, 13 at the time, on my own, and to act as if I could survive this loss. I didn't look like a widow or act like a widow, but I felt like one. I was widowish. So first of all, I want to know so many things just from that statement, which is why I continue to read, and that's why I asked you to come and be our guest. But first, before I ask you those questions, can you tell us about Joel?
Yes, it's my favorite topic.
Okay.
And it's one of those things, like, as a younger widow, what I realized in sharing my story, certainly in my essays, in my memoir, in podcasts, sharing my story is what keeps Joel close and keeps him alive in a way. And that is so important to me. And it's something I didn't think was possible in those early days of grief
Yeah.
and losing him so unexpectedly.
Right. So pre-West Nile Virus, though, like what was this man you fell in love with? Who was he?
So we met when, I was like a teenager. He was a few years older than me, but we worked together at a record company here in Los Angeles. And he was just somebody, like, we had an immediate connection. We became fast friends. And he was sort of etched in my mind as somebody who I wanted to marry, somebody like him one
Okay.
day.
He was a
You
nice
know,
guy.
Such a nice guy,
Yeah.
so funny, so handsome. We called each other Hun.
Yeah, we weren't the
Yeah.
originals, huh?
So he just really was somebody who was a great listener, and I always appreciated whatever he had to say or talk about. He was so knowledgeable about music, and not so much as like a performer, that's not what he was, but he just knew everything there was to know about bands, everything from like their tour lineup to who played on their records, to the B-sides, to who their A&R person was, to what
Wow.
label they were signed to. Like, he was so knowledgeable about everything. And he was I mean, I met him at the very beginning of his career, but he had a long career in the music industry. And he was just a very loving and devoted husband and father. And we were just a great team. I always say, we were definitely in love with each other. Obviously, we were married. We loved each other, but we really liked each other.
That's so important.
I think it is more important almost, because I think love is pretty easy, actually. I think liking and wanting to spend the time with the person who you're so committed to is hard.
Yes.
Or it can be.
Yeah.
And I think we had that. Like, we had that thing. And so the whole thing with West Nile virus is that's one of a few things listed on his death certificate. But what led to the West Nile virus was he had MS.
Right.
And
so tell me about that. When did he get diagnosed with MS?
So he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis maybe 5 years before he died.
So he was how old at that point?
I want to say he was maybe 40, early 40s, maybe 45 at the most.
Is that, Hun, do you know? Is because Scott's mom had MS. Is that a young age to get diagnosed?
Yeah, my mom was like 30, so
she was, yeah.
Well, it's very rare for men to have it.
it is, isn't it? Yeah, it's
What's
more common for
ironic is I know more men with it than women. But diagnosis can happen as early as like your 20s.
Okay.
For Joel, it happened because he was, in addition to being like an avid music person, he was also into sports, and his own physical health was very important to him. And so he played in a basketball league and a softball league. He'd play racquetball a couple times a week. Like, he was very active.
Yeah.
And he came home from his weekly basketball game one night, and like shortly after he left, he was back home within 30 minutes. And he said, something's wrong. Something's really wrong. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, my legs, I can't go after the ball. Like, my brain is telling me, there goes the ball. And I'm just standing there like, I can't. There's a disconnect. So after a lot of trial and error, he was finally diagnosed with MS. And with a lot of these autoimmune diseases, the medications are pretty severe. The side effects can be brutal. But we found one that worked for him really well.
Oh, that's good.
But then the efficacy of the drug only lasts for a certain amount of time.
Okay.
So he was on this one medication that for a number of years worked really well, and then it stopped working. And the problem with that was finding another one that could help stave off all of the symptoms that seemed to be getting progressively worse.
Right. And then you told me that you were taking COVID precautions before.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this was long before COVID. This was in 2013.
So what did that look like in your family?
So this was because he was in between medication, and he was getting these IV steroid treatments to sort of bridge the gap between the medicine that was no longer working, the medicine he started but had yet to kick in. He was in pretty bad shape. So he was getting these IV steroid treatments at home, which lowered what was already a fragile immune system for him.
Right.
So my daughter and I were the only ones coming and going, leaving the house. And the minute we would walk in, we were like washing our hands and making sure everything was like sterilized. She didn't have any friends over. It was a short amount of time. It was maybe like 2 weeks at the most, where we were told, while he's on these steroids, his contact with the outside world has to be very limited because of infection. And so we're like, okay, so we didn't realize though that his being in the backyard would prove to be lethal, because he got bit by a mosquito, and it was weeks later that he started having these other symptoms that we knew weren't really MS. We weren't sure if it was a reaction to the MS meds or what was going on, but ultimately.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, I did a little research on West Nile, which I'm sure that you know all about this, but I just wanted to tell people that are listening, most people that are infected do not develop symptoms from West Nile. There's febrile illnesses there's febrile illness where 1 in 5 infected people do develop fever, body aches, joint pains, vomiting, etc. Most recover completely, but the fatigue and weakness can last for weeks or months. And then 1 out of 10 folks who develop the severe illness die. So they have to get to that point. It's like you probably won't have symptoms, but if you do and you develop those symptoms, 1 in 10 of you might die.
Right.
There's no vaccine. There's no treatment for it. The best way to prevent it is to protect yourself from mosquitoes.
Right.
Scott never gets bit by mosquitoes.
It's very rare. I'm
Yeah.
just one of those.
I get bit all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
The Aedes mosquito, which was originally located in tropical climates, has been found on nearly every continent in the world. Finally arrived in California about 10 years ago via a cargo ship. This past summer of 22, it appeared that they migrated en masse to the Southland, spreading into the San Fernando Valley in a way that they never had before. So I know that you wrote about Joel's death and what that was like, but writing and talking are different. Are you okay talking about it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we talked when we were having our conversation about which is worse, going quickly or going slowly.
Right.
So talk to me about what your experience was like.
Well, Joel spent 3 weeks in the hospital, most of which he was in a coma for. And a part of me knew he was not going to recover from this. Even though the doctors were talking in percentages, and math is not my strong suit, but they were saying, well, maybe he'll recover at 50%. And I'm thinking, well, he came in at like 70%.
Right.
So what does a 50% recovery from this look like? He was already extremely compromised by the MS. At the time, it was like a scene out of a movie. Like, we did not know it was West Nile until the very, very end of these 3 weeks. So every part of his body and mind was shutting down. Every day was like a worse than the day before scenario. So it was a bizarre and very surreal time, and I write about all of this in Widowish, but I just kept thinking, what would Joel want?
Yeah.
What would Joel do?
Yes.
And because we were partners in everything, and he wasn't there for me to discuss any of this with, it was a very isolating and lonely experience, even though I was surrounded by family and friends. But I really had to stay strong for our daughter, who was 13 at the time.
Yeah.
It was just surreal. And the doctors were truly baffled by what was going on. They suspected day one that it was some kind of virus, but the cultures kept coming back negative. And again, like COVID, you could take an at-home COVID test that's negative, and then you're still not feeling better. So you go get a swab or a PCR or whatever, and then, oh, lo and behold, you're positive. So, similar but different. But there was a lot of confusion in the hospital, a lot of, oh, well, we thought it was this, it wasn't. Oh, maybe it is this. We're going to test for that again. And that was going on for 21 days.
Wow.
So once we knew that it was West Nile, it was like there was no coming back from that. He had already suffered severe brain damage. At one day, he was paralyzed from the waist down. The next day, they're like, he's paralyzed from the neck down. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, once we know what this is, they'll make him better. They'll give him the antidote.
Right.
They'll give him the shot. They'll give him whatever, and he'll be fine. But it's like, your mind plays tricks with you.
Mm-hmm. And because there's no antidote.
There's no cure.
There's nothing they can do.
Yeah.
Did they tell you that at that point, that there was nothing they could do?
Yeah, and I spell it out in the book very clearly. Like it's really like the doctor who came in to tell me it was West Nile couldn't look me in the eye. He was crying. And I basically said to him, okay, so if this was one of your parents, because the doctors were all so young.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, this was one of your parents, what would you do? And he said, I would end their life.
Wow.
So it was dire.
When did he pass after that? How soon until he passed?
Well, that conversation happened on my birthday. and I did not want my husband to die on my birthday. So, and I also wanted family who was out of town to be able to come in and say goodbye. So maybe like 3 days later.
Okay. So he passes. We talked about the onlys. After
Right.
that, your daughter was then an only child.
Right.
You were the only parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your daughter was also the only one whose dad had died.
Right.
And you were the only one whose husband had died.
Right.
What was that like?
It really was so surreal. And it's like I look back at that year and I don't know how we did it. I don't know how I was able to, like I said, or I wrote you, I guess, act as if I was okay, because I was the furthest thing from okay. And I really put all of my focus, effort, and energy into our daughter because, 13 is such a tender age. She was in 8th grade. It was the beginning of the school year. She had so much she was looking forward to, it being the last year of middle school, then moving on to high school, all of these events. And I just made her my focus in a way that, I think as parents, our kids are always our focus, but this was like, I was just existing to keep her focused and moving forward, and we're going to get through this. And I think it was like acting as if I could do those things helped me to become as strong as I felt I needed to be.
Wow.
But it was very isolating, I think, for Sophie. When you're in 8th grade, middle school, like you want to be just like everybody else. You don't want to be different at all. And she became the girl whose dad died.
Yeah.
And was very much the only. And, it was, I tried to keep things as normal as possible. Like a lot of our kids, certainly here in LA, she had a very scheduled existence. And I just wanted to keep her on track. And
keep the routines, keep her in her activities.
Yeah. And then for me, because my life revolved around her, I would be standing there at the school pickup line where a lot of the other parents would, I remember there was like some school field trip or something, and I had to go to school like at midnight to pick her up from wherever they had been that day. And I was in a circle with some of the other moms talking, and a few of them I didn't even know or didn't know well. And they were talking about how they were so mad that their husbands wouldn't get up to come get their kid at midnight from this field trip. And another was complaining that her husband was out of town the whole weekend and she had to deal with the kids on her own. And I'm standing there like, how do I interject and tell these ladies, like, I don't, like, really? Like, do you know what I'm dealing with? Yeah. Like, I don't have a husband. And even to this day, and Joel's been gone a long time at this point, but even to this day, friends and lives have changed. People who were married at the time are now divorced and when I hear people complaining about their ex, I think, well, at least I don't even have that luxury. Like Joel and I were strong. There's no question we'd still be married. But like, I don't have that break. And that's where I kind of came up with this idea of only parent, because people would refer to me as a single parent. Oh, you're a single parent now. And I thought, I'm not a single, to me, a single parent, and every situation is different, for sure. But it, to me, indicates perhaps that a choice was made about being a single parent.
Right. Someone made a choice.
Somebody along the lines. Perhaps. Again, every situation is different. But whenever people would say that to me, I really bristled at that, because I'm like, there's nothing single about my situation. And when I thought, oh, well, Sophie's an only child, I am an only parent. That's really the best way I could describe my situation.
No, I completely hear that. And I also hear the absence of compassion for your situation in those conversations. I've experienced that myself on regarding different things, and I'm always just, not outraged. That's not the right word, but just like, come on, like
disappointed. Outrage, I think, works. I mean,
it is disappointing, and my whole brand is about inclusivity, so I'm always trying to be mindful if in any circle, is this the most inclusive conversation we can have, and is somebody feeling left out or like they're the only one in the room, and to be mindful of that. You said that the picture in your head that you had of widows, right, didn't match what you saw in the mirror. What was the picture in your head when you heard the word widow?
Well, I don't think I'm alone in envisioning a widow being a much older person. Really, that's it. Just somebody like, I was in my 40s when Joel died, and I knew at the time I didn't know anybody who lost a spouse in their 40s or 30s or 20s.
I didn't either in my 40s. No.
Yeah. Now, because of the work that I've done and because of my book and the essays I've written, I've met a whole world of young widows.
Right.
That I didn't even know existed, even here in our little village. There were plenty of widows, but I didn't know them at the time. So I really felt like and believed I was the only one.
Yeah.
So it was a very isolating experience, again, very lonely. And you said, but that's how I came up with Widowish, because I felt like I was failing somehow at widowhood, because I didn't look like a widow just by virtue of the fact that I was out of my house and taking my daughter to her activities and going to Trader Joe's and, living my life because I had to. It didn't match what I think people considered the grieving, grief-stricken.
I completely have that same picture in my head.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's much different than anyone in their 40s, but I can totally picture you and thinking about, the image that because you're young and, you had this really vibrant marriage and you weren't looking at, I'm only going to have X amount of time with this guy. You thought this was going, the distance, right?
Absolutely.
You wrote, so this I thought was funny. I think when you and I talked, I laughed out loud. But you wrote, once I started referring to myself as a widow. So like you had accepted this.
Yeah.
You couldn't stop. You said, I don't know what took me so long to claim it. That's what it felt like I was claiming the word, asserting some truth about myself because it wasn't obvious if you looked at me. And in saying it, declaring it, embracing it, I was convincing myself it was real. Joel was gone. He was still my husband. We were still married, but I was a widow. And you talked about so you just tell me the story of how you would say it to everybody under any circumstances.
Well, it's actually like a bittersweet reflection for me because like you just read, I kept saying, we would, go to In-N-Out and go through the drive-thru, and I kept thinking, well, somebody will give me something just so they're going to feel sorry for me. So maybe they'll give me an extra fries. And I'd be with Sophie, my daughter, and we'd order our doubles and our milkshakes. And then I would say, and by the way, I'm a widow.
Right.
And Sophie would be mortified. And I did that all the time. I would take the dogs to the groomer and they'd say, okay, she'll be ready at 3. I'm like, okay, I'll be back. I'm a widow, and people were stunned,
right.
Truly stunned. And it's I kind of needed that to validate how other I felt. I had to say it out loud because people didn't know. Everybody is walking around with a story. Every single person, everybody, any of us in this room encountered today has a story of some kind. And I felt like as a new and young widow, I just felt the need to talk about it, whereas our daughter didn't.
Right.
So we grieved very differently, and that's why it's a little bittersweet. And it is kind of funny, but Sophie did not want the world to know that her dad died. She did not want me to be in my presence when I was making this declaration all over town.
Yeah.
She wanted to just kind of blend in, and I was like, oh, no, I'm a widow. I want people to know. And Yep.
Yeah.
And actually, just the other day, this is so silly.
Tell
But
me.
I was with one of my best friends. We were at Best Buy and buying something, and the guy put in my information. He said, "Do you have an account?" I said, "I don't think so. If I do, it's so old, but try." And I gave him my phone number, and Joel's name popped up.
Right.
And my friend like kind of grabbed me and was like, "Oh my God." And so I said to the guy, "Oh, that's my late husband." And he kind of did a double take. And I said, "I know, I don't look like a widow, do I?"
Yeah.
My friend was dying. Like, she's like, "I can't believe you're saying, like, what are you?" And the guy was like, "No, no, you don't. I'm so sorry."
She was mortified.
Mortified,
Yeah.
but laughing.
But
and
laughing,
like, only
yeah,
you.
yeah.
She's like, "Why
Right,
do you have
right.
to do that?" Like,
Yeah.
she's like, and then she wrote it down. She's like, "I have to tell somebody that you just did that." And I was like, but so I still do it.
Yes,
Like,
yeah.
because those things happen. Like, who thinks you're going to be at Best Buy and you put in like a phone number and then,
Right.
oh, my late husband.
Blindsided by that.
It's
Yeah.
like, and that is just my day to day.
There is another scene that you wrote about in Trader Joe's
Oh, yeah.
where someone came up to you and was, it sounds like the intention was to offer you compassion. But can you
Yeah.
talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, at the time, because we were a vibrant couple and, we're all living in the same, everybody kind of has the same version of their story and in terms of like it revolving around our kids. And I realized I really was like this blank screen for everybody else's projections because it was such a shock to the community. Joel was so well liked and everybody knew him and he was such an involved dad. And so this woman saw me at Trader Joe's and I knew her for years. Our kids grew up together since kindergarten. We weren't friends, but again, like, we knew each other. And she saw me and she burst into tears, just looking at me from across the produce,
Yeah.
And I just thought, not today. Like, I do not come at me with
Right.
like your
Your
it had nothing to do with
Yeah,
me. Like
yeah.
that's, I picked that up very early on. And she just came up to me. She's like, "Oh my God, I keep thinking of you and Sophie. I don't know what I would do if that were me."
Yeah.
And that crystallized it had nothing, again, like that's her thing.
Yes.
And so I just was like, "Nice to see you." And I just kept walking. And
Well, it's her fear, right?
Yeah,
It's her
exactly.
own fear of, and people want to know if you're okay because this feels like, one of the worst things that could happen and you're out,
right.
You're out at Trader Joe's. How are you doing that? Would I be able to do that? Is what people
Exactly.
really want to know. Would I be, out with my daughter? Would I be doing A, B, and C? Or would I be holed up because I would be too fragile?
Right.
And I think that I don't think this. I know that we as a society, we just don't talk about death enough.
Right.
And if we had more conversations about it, people might not be so quick to project what's going on with them, their fears, their phobias, their feelings onto the person who is sitting possibly with real grief.
Right.
Or at least going through a process. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, for me, death has been a part of my conversation since Joel died. So
Right.
I do feel like my take is just like, no, it is part of my world.
Yes.
But it wasn't. It wouldn't have been. And the truth is, too, it's like, things are supposed to happen in a particular order. And in my situation, my parents are divorced, each remarried. Joel's parents are divorced, each remarried. So Sophie has 4 sets of grandparents. They're all still alive,
Yeah.
but her dad isn't here.
Right.
So that is such a gift. I'm so grateful that she has all of that love and support from her grandparents.
Right.
But how does that make sense to a 13-year-old that the only death that her peers have really experienced are family pets and grandparents.
Yeah.
And so here she is with her dad no longer. So it's this weird thing where like we're trying to navigate loss, but her first experience is with like a primary person in her life.
Yeah.
And for me too, like when Joel died and it came time to, like, we're Jewish and these Jewish traditions of sitting Shiva and all, I never did that for, thankfully my parents are alive. So
right.
I didn't know
you
the
had
first
never
thing.
organized that. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know the first thing about like rituals around death and grief and, so it was all, and my friends too, like we were all like, none of us knew kind of what to do. We managed, we figured it out, but I couldn't believe that I was like the guinea pig
right.
for all of this.
You were the first one.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, it's still surreal. Like it's my life.
Yeah.
But again, these are the things, and talking about it now, like this is what keeps Joel alive. And to me, that's everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I looked up, I was trying to find if there was a word for a child who had lost one parent. There's orphan
Right.
for a child who loses both. There's widow for you.
Right.
Or widower for a husband, or a father. No, a husband. But yeah, there's no word for a child who's lost a parent. And I feel like there should be, because
Right.
what you're describing for your daughter is a really unique situation that I don't know how unique it is, but my kids didn't have anybody with that situation in their classes growing up.
Right. I mean, there's also not a word for parents who lose a child.
Oh.
That's something that's talked a lot about in the grief community. That
Yeah.
There's no, how do you refer to yourself as a
Right.
parent who lost a child? I mean, it's so
No.
sad and
Yeah.
so tragic. But there's no word for that either. I mean, Sophie and I joke because we both have a little bit of a twisted sense of humor, as did Joel. But I would just say she's half an orphan.
You're half an orphan.
Yeah.
Were you always a writer?
I was. I mean, that's what's interesting about this part of my story is that, I was a screenwriter for many, many years.
What were your projects that you wrote on?
I worked on a show called Bill Nye the Science Guy.
I love Bill Nye the Science Guy.
That was my very first show.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Right. So the funny thing about that is, like, when I went to work on that show, I mean, I was a baby. I can't believe it. I was so young, and I got my break really early. But nobody outside of Seattle, which is where we filmed the show, heard of Bill Nye the Science Guy. So now he's famous because of those shows that were like 25 years old at this point.
Yes.
But at the time, he was like a local kind of celebrity in Seattle, and the show was syndicated by Disney. And I would tell people I work on this show, and they were like, what? Like,
Right.
who? Huh? Like, nobody took it seriously.
Yeah.
But that was my first experience. And then I went on, some bigger shows were like Party of Five, which was big at the time.
Yes.
In the 90s, Beverly Hills 90210.
Very big. Both
Then,
of those.
yeah, Lizzie McGuire,
Oh,
which
yeah.
a lot of people are like, oh my God. That's the one that people give like the biggest reaction. And a few in between, and some TV movies back when that was a thing. And
Right.
so I had a nice career as a screenwriter, and things were kind of tapering off around the time that Joel was very sick. And I did some other things here and there. And then when he died, I really thought, okay, I either go back to that now, like full throttle, or I figure out something else entirely. Because when you're a screenwriter and you're working on these shows, you're there around the clock. Like, the work is the priority. And I wanted to be there for Sophie. And I just didn't think I could manage those hours and the demands that come with being like a working writer on a TV show. So my life kind of took some twists and turns, obviously, or I should say my career took some twists and turns. But I ended up in a writing group, which I had never done before. Here I was, like this professional writer. I had never been in a writing group. And I started working on a novel. And I was well into it. Like and by the way, like the writing group I joined it at the suggestion of a close friend who just thought, you need something for you. You need to do something that's just for you. And I hemmed and hawed, but I did it. And she was so right. Like, just writing, it gave me an escape from what my life had become.
Yeah.
And I met once a week with this group, and I loved it. And I was working on this novel. And then I started seeing somebody
Yes. Is this the guy on your Instagram?
Yes. All of this is in the book. But so then I told the same friend who was in the writers group with me who suggested I join the writing group. And I said, and by the way, I'm seeing this guy. And she kind of stopped and looked at me and was like, okay, hold up. You're a widow. You're Sophie's only parent. You're now telling me that you're seeing this guy and you're not writing about it?
Yeah, this is a memoir. Yeah.
Well, she didn't even say that.
Yeah.
She just was making the point, like, you should be writing about this.
Mm-hmm.
But coming from, like, my screenwriter mind, and, like, at that point, my career was, at least I had been doing that maybe for 12 or 15 years.
Right.
And so I only thought in terms of fiction. And I was working on a novel. So the thought of writing about myself or writing anything personal, it's like she was speaking Greek. I had no idea what she was even talking about. But her words really resonated and really stuck with me. And so, and I really had like a very strong reaction to like, why would I write about myself? Like, you're crazy. But then the next week going into class, I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a try because I do have something to say. And then once I started writing about all of the things I was experiencing as a widow and as an only parent and being the only widow in the room,
right,
I couldn't stop. And I started writing essays and my essays started getting published. And then one thing led to another. And I started hearing from people. This is before I wrote Widowish, my memoir. I started hearing from people, some of whom lived here in Los Angeles, and they all wanted to meet me. And they all, and then this one had a friend whose husband just died, or this one had a friend whose wife passed away a year ago, and they all wanted to talk to me. I didn't know how to carry all of these people's feelings, and I was getting like very intimate details about these strangers, and then I had met and befriended another widow in the neighborhood who had gone through it a few years before I did, and together we started this widow group, and one thing led to another, and so I was then part of this widow group and my writing group, and I was publishing these essays, and then a few years into it, I thought, you know what, maybe I do have a memoir, because I had more to say.
Yeah.
No two essays are alike. I've written hundreds at this point, and even though I have written all of these essays, I have my memoir out. I continue to write essays. Like, I feel like this is something that I will forever write about, because there's always something new that I have yet to explore. And writing about all of this has truly been the most healing thing I could have done for myself. And I think that's why I continue to write about it and why I have so much to say about it, because yes, it keeps Joel close and it keeps Joel alive, but it is the most healing thing I could have done. And I didn't see any of that coming.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm listening to you talking about screenwriting and then novel writing and then memoir writing. Do you see it as a screenplay?
Well, the rights to Widowish have been optioned.
Are you going to write it?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how it's going to unfold. I mean, people ask me that all the time because of my background.
Yeah.
But the truth is, like, if I saw this as a screenplay, I would have written it. That would have been easier for me.
Right.
Because that's the world I knew. So if that's how I saw the story, I think that my inclination would have been, I'm just going to write the movie or the TV pilot.
Right.
But that's not how it came out, which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see how things unfold.
Nice. The widow's boyfriend.
Yeah.
That was the tagline I saw under the post. I love that.
Yeah, he's been around since. So Marcos is somebody who.
You're like, Marcos from the book.
Yeah.
If you've read the book, you know who this is.
Yeah. So he was our daughter's guitar teacher.
Okay.
So he's somebody that I knew, who Joel knew, and who Sophie knew. And the first time I met him, I remember coming home and saying to Joel, like, nobody told me the guitar teacher's so hot, And Joel was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, I guess he's a good looking guy. Like, he,
Right.
So then I called up the ladies and I was like, nobody told me. And they were like, oh, one of my friends was like, oh, get in line. We all have a crush on him,
Yeah.
So But, months and months went by after Joel died, but it was still within that first year of losing him. And Marcos was helping me with some things, some musical equipment and stuff that I found, and I really had no idea what to do with any of it. And I ran into him one night, and like everybody, truly everybody at the time was like, if you ever need anything, and what,
Right.
And like a light bulb went off, and I was like, oh my God, I found all these amps and guitars, and I could donate it. I wouldn't even know where to begin. And so he was like, oh, I'll help you, no problem. But the thing about him that really struck me was that he talked about Joel so easily. He would say his name.
Yeah.
He would ask about me, like say, well, how did Joel do this? Or what did and even close friends had, again, we were also inexperienced with grief. But Marcos,
he didn't shy away from it.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And I just was so like, wow, what an amazing guy. And I didn't think we were going to have a relationship. I mean, it was almost like my writing group. Like my time with him was kind of like my time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I realized, oh, it was kind of evolving into something I wasn't expecting. And then
actually, I was saying, so you have to go to this woman's Instagram and you can see this trip to Portugal, which looks fabulous. And
it was.
And you name him in the picture. So I think actually definitely go to Melissa's Instagram, but read the book so that you can appreciate the pictures that you're seeing there, the posts that you're seeing there, because then it'll be like it's coming to life for you, and you'll be even more excited. So Widowish, I just want to give a little plug, was an Amazon editor's pick for best memoir, a Goodreads top book pick for 2021, and has been named one of Book Authority's 100 best grief books of all time.
Amazing.
Amazing. Where can people find you?
At my website, which is widowish.com.
It's a great website.
Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you for mentioning my Instagram, which is Melissa Gould _author.
Okay.
And really between my website and Instagram, people can find out.
You live there.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they can find you in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, Laura, you mentioned Instagram, is when the book first came out, and, it is a memoir, and I do use a lot of aliases, but with very little digging, people have figured out who's who.
Yeah.
But there was like a whole series I did in the week that the book came out of like people from the book. And it was so funny because I got so many comments, and people would write to me or DM, like, that's exactly how they pictured so-and-so, or
that's great.
And it was just like, wow, that's just like a treat I think you give your readers. It's like, especially with memoir, which is the truth, a piece of your life. People are genuinely interested and curious about like the real people. So
absolutely. I am.
Yeah. I mean, I am too. And if I love a book, like, believe me, I'm reading the acknowledgments, I'm Googling those people. So I know people do.
Yes.
I don't think I'm alone in that, but
no, not at all.
That's where Instagram can be fun, because especially when I do post about Marcos, I get like, oh my God.
Yes. It's so great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing your story and talking about Joel and writing and being a widow and creating a community, which is what we do here on this show.
Yeah, it's great.
We want people to not feel like they're the only one in the room. And I'm sure that you've made someone feel like that just now. One of our listeners is going, oh, good, I'm not the only one. So thank you, Melissa.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. This was great. Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Melissa Gould, and I am the only widowish one in the room.